I want to welcome everybody. My name is Isabel Janiches with the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group, and we are a grassroots advocacy group supporting farmers and ranchers and other land managers in soil stewardship and regenerative agriculture. I'm really pleased to see you all here. There's quite a bit of interest in this emerging practice of using targeted grazing with ruminants to manage vegetation, addressing fuel overload, and limiting wildfire spread and intensity. We can use targeted grazing to create defensible space, to keep fires smaller and less destructive, therefore losing less habitat and lessening fuel threats to structures. And at the same time, of course, it's good for soil health, with the larger goal of establishing a long-term and landscape scale approach to fire management and ecosystem restoration. We'll learn all about this today. We'll have a presentation by contract grazer Sarah Bangard with RX Grazing Services, followed by a Q&A. I'll have a new tool to share, very exciting, and also some announcements before we close at 6:30 p.m. But first, I want to give the mic to Andrew Hautzinger, who is the district director at the Valencia Soil and Water Conservation District. And he takes care of the Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area, which burned in the April 2022 Big Hole Fire. And this tragic event really was the impetus for this webinar. And so I'll let Andrew set the stage for us. Thanks, Andrew, for being here.
Well, big thanks, Isabel, for making this happen. And good evening to everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the deliberations that we're having at Valencia Soil and Water Conservation District after the April 11th Big Hole burn, and we're trying to land on our feet and do the right things to incorporate this next chapter in our district Whitfield complex life, and I think that there's could be very well a fitting place for animals to come back into the Bosque and play a managed role that really could make a big difference on being sustainable and having an all-in kind of strategy for managing our bosque and caring for our forest. So I've got a couple slides I want to present to you all, and hopefully we'll be able to keep to my 5 minutes, because I promised Isabel I would, even though I like to talk. As Duana knows that's the case. So can people see my slide number one? Is it
yeah.
up and running? Beautiful. So again, thanks to Isabel and all those in the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group for inviting myself and Sarah for today's discussion. A lot of ripe information. I've got a lot to learn on this whole front, but at least let me set the stage for some of the context for the way we're thinking about some of these related issues down at Valencia Soil and Water Conservation District. So what you see in front of you is our iconic owl tree, oldest tree on the preserve, most photographed, most poetried, if that's a word, piece of vegetation in our preserve. And on April the 11th, it burned to a crisp. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just what happened with the fire, show some very quick pictures, but also then I want to move into this question of, well, what's next? So let me see if I can do this right. So this is a proposal, a map for our southern unit. We have 3 management units. This is our southern unit, Rio Bajo Conservation Area. And we are trying to put forward a vegetative transect and a hydrologic transect that are actually going to get surveyed in next week. So it's actually happening, much to my amazement. We had a board meeting on Tuesday, and I got the endorsement from my board of supervisors to do this. So I'm super excited that certain parts of this project are gonna take off. So with that, let me jump in. Speaking of the board of supervisors, I have the pleasure of working for 7 supervisors, all volunteers with a real persistent interest in natural resource management. So that's what I signed up for, with a staff of 3. Should be 30 for the work out there, but right now we got a staff of 3. Is what it is. Valencia Soil as folks may or may not know, Valencia Soil is one of 47 soil and water conservation districts in the great state of New Mexico. 3,000 of us exist across all 50 states in some way, shape, or form. Every state has a soil and water conservation district in them. Valencia is unique in the sense that we have conservation areas, which I'll show you in a moment, that we manage. The other 46 do not, minus Edgewood, which has a small one. All within our 1.4 million acres includes all of Valencia County and bits of the surrounding counties, including all of the Isleta Pueblo lands as well as the Laguna Pueblo. So real important for us to maintain First Nation sensibilities in the operation of our duties. As noted, we have three management units. The main one is the Whitfield Conservation Area that came into public ownership in the late 1990s. Just north of that is a startup property called Stacy, and then 3 miles south is the Rio Bajo Conservation Area, which is really the project that I'll very quickly mention to you today. A lot of the passion and the current focus of our efforts were a product of the Big Hole Fire, which you see the outline in front of you, measuring some 904 acres, started on the west side of the river, moved to the east side, 70-mile-an-hour winds, biggest fire in the history of the Bosque. Unfortunately, 3 years prior, there's the 2019 Iron Horse Fire, which at that time was the biggest fire in the history of the Bosque. And someone smarter than me is going to have to tell what the take-homes are, but it sat on the exact same footprint, a smaller footprint, but the exact same footprint as the Big Hole Fire. So some lessons to be learned there. I can't say for sure what they are at this point in time, but here's a quick zoom in on the Whitfield Wildlife Conservation Area and the areas that did get burned. 85% of the area burned. Firefighters are telling us it's low to medium severity, except for an occasional hotspot, and to which we say, you mean the 100-year-old cottonwood tree? Is that the hotspot? So again, it lost a lot of beautiful trees, but also we're in this period of just this crazy green flush response to the fire and the recent rains. So it's Whitfield's as green as it's been in many years, but we have this pallor of dead trees on all sides. To put a little perspective, the Stacy unit is a startup unit. I won't even spend much time on it, but to say it's burned 80 to 90% twice now in the last 4 years. So we've got fire on our minds for this unit as well. The unit I'll speak mostly about this evening, is the Rio Bajo Conservation Area, which is again 3 miles south of our Whitfield area. So what we're putting forward is a monitoring plan that hopefully also provides the impetus to reduce. We have a 50-acre stand of trees that are just chock full of salt cedar and dead underbrush, and is so ready to burn. It's frightening. We've known that for a handful of years, and here, lo and behold, it was Whitfield proper that burned, not Rio Bajo, which I guess we should be thankful for in some regards. But we're pushing a science-driven management approach where we want to know what's growing, we want to know where the water is, and we really want to have a climate-adapted sensibility for how we move forward in replanting. So a lot of this stuff is going to be on the ground at the end of next week. So we have a consultant traveling up from Texas to help us starting on July the 3rd. Here's that 50-acre stand with a really nice 30 to 50-year-old medium age stand of cottonwood trees with this near 100% invasive understory. So we want to go in there and reduce the fire danger, but also have habitat consideration. So we're going to have a strategic clearing of this understory happening this September by schedule currently. But we don't want to stop there. What do we replace? What we take out? And how do we do this with a broader sense of, here's my 50-acre piece down here, but I know when I finish that 50-acre clearance work, thinning work, it's not clearance work, I'm going to feel like I haven't really done my job to really protect the area from fire, because directly west of there is 500 acres under Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District ownership that is unmanaged, mixed riparian, ready to burn. So we're trying to piece all this together for the general benefits of in this stretch of the river. It's really hard to fight Bosque fires because we don't have egress, we don't have defensible space for heroic firefighters. We want to break up the fires with fire breaks to keep them smaller, to improve habitat protection. And I think there's a real vital chance here for us to develop a contract for goats, sheep to come in and graze the fuel breaks in some manner that hopefully provides some economic incentive for a small business owner, but also is another piece of us going back to where we've came before. I'm fully an advocate, as well as I understand it, of regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming. It just seems like there's a nugget of wisdom in going back to what our ancestors had done successfully. So bringing animals back into the landscape here makes sense, but it's, as I've said to a handful of visiting politicians at Whitfield, it's no longer your grandfather's Bosque. This isn't the same place where I've been told more times than I can count. Well, yeah, when my granddad was running cows around the Bosque here, they'd eat all the underbrush and there's never any fires. And I respectfully say, well, it's no longer your grandpa's Bosque. The river no longer has the hydrologic gusto it once did. Invasive species have changed the name of the game in the Bosque. We have NEPA and Endangered Species Act, federal regulations that we have to apply to. So it's a different game now. And I think this proposal here of basically going from our 50 acres to a 500 acre proposal is the first time in my knowledge where we're actually, went too fast, actually trying to do something at scale. But good enough. Here's the next screen. Fuel break decisions, I think are it's an active conversation in our planning. We think we may do a little bit of one fuel break development this fall, and then pull back and have a 6-month planning conversation to talk about if we can do the rest. So basically what you're seeing here is a hoped for endorsement of Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District to grow to a 2-mile river reach, 500 acre project size that could be an example for others to learn from and take from things that work and things that don't to manage their own pieces of land, whether it's forested land or not. So again, we have a lot of choices in the fire break discussion. What's the width is a huge choice. Some people say 20 feet, other people say 200 feet. So I'm still, that's active in our conversations. And then this whole question about, yeah, once you get them built, how do you maintain them in a sensible manner? So that's where I really view, I'm on a very steep learning curve, but I'm open-minded and optimistic that the animals really can be brought in here as an effective tool. And have the chance, and Sarah will tell us more about this later, of being financially competitive to other ways of treating the Bosque to maintain fire prevention goals. Zooming in real quick at one of those fire breaks, here's an opportunity where we look at where do we place the fire break? How is it constructed? Is there a curve here? Does it need to be perpendicular to the river? This is just a cartoon right now that we the fire breaks are just suggestive, just conceptual, but just for what it's worth, the red dashed lines on the screen there measure about 50 feet in the actual, if you were to go out in the ground in that width. So what is 50 feet by us? And I think it's important to notice that we had some 120, 130 foot bulldozer fire breaks for the Big Hole fire. And we had the Rio Grande River flowing flow tilt. None of them slowed the fire down, but that's not what we're shooting for. We're not preparing for the 20% high wind, 70-mile-an-hour scenario. The fire professionals in our conversations are talking about, well, we're shooting for the 80% scenario where it's not so high winds and gives the firefighters a chance again to get that defensible space to start breaking up the fire. So that's kind of the concept that we're working on. I don't have a whole lot more smart ideas to throw out, but to say I am full in on using this as a demonstration area to try to talk about grazing animals as an effective tool in amongst many tools that we need to bring out of our tool bag to make this kind of project successful. So again, we're all about environmental education at our location. How am I doing time-wise?
I think you should wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm wrapping up. So we're all about environmental education, and this fits very nicely in that context. So appreciate everybody's time. Look forward to learn a lot today and hopefully be able to partner with you guys moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you so much. really, we all appreciate your good work, your team's good work, and the passion speaks out of you, and it is visible on the ground. So really, many thanks and best of luck going forward. I hope this is going to be helpful in the process, right? So thank you.
Fantastic, my pleasure.
So I will introduce Sarah Bengard next. She is with RX Grazing Services, which is a company that specializes in manipulating plant communities with targeted grazing in the Four Corners area with the goal to improve ecosystem functions. She also raises top quality Spanish and Spanish cross meat goats for sale, and also range adapted breeding stock. The goats are part of the team, and Sarah raises the animals with minimal modern inputs that are adapted to their environment. Her commitment is really to work with nature to produce healthy and happy animals. So really, thank you, Sarah, for making the time to be with us today.
You bet. Yep. Thanks for the introduction. That was great. And thanks everyone for being here. It sounds like we have a pretty good turnout, and that's awesome. So you could go ahead and start that slideshow if you're ready.
Yes, coming along. And for the participants, bear in mind that I cannot see the chat while I'm in the presentation, but do please feel free to drop any questions in there, and we'll get to it after the presentation. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Sarah Bengard. I am the owner and operator of RX Grazing Services. As Isabel mentioned, all of those things that we are striving for. My company is based out of southwestern Colorado. We're north of Cortez. I understand I'm probably presenting to a large group of folks in New Mexico. New Mexico is a second home for me. I can see it out my front window right now. And we spend the winters in Wagon Mound, New Mexico with the goats. And so this winter might be closer to northwestern New Mexico, but it's a second home for us. And the ecosystem types are not terribly different here than they are there. You can go ahead with the next slide. So Isabella more or less covered our mission statement. As she mentioned, our goal is to combine our human knowledge and the impacts from animals to improve our natural environment and ecosystem health and ecosystem services, as well as produce some very happy and healthy, awesome meat goats. Go ahead. So what is targeted grazing and what is the application? So the Society for Range Management, the Targeted Grazing Committee, defines it as the application of specific kinds of livestock as determined by season, duration, and intensity to accomplish a defined vegetation or landscape goal. And so that's a pretty broad statement, but basically all ecosystems were adapted to withstand, and are oftentimes a benefit to an ecosystem, some type of disturbance. And targeted grazing is using animals to mimic natural disturbances such as fire or floods or all the different things that the natural environment goes through its successional processes. And because so many of these are hard to apply either for safety rules or cost effectiveness. So in the case of safety, we all know what can happen with prescribed burns and those getting out of control. And then as far as mechanical and herbicides, there's lots of unwanted residual effects from herbicides, and doing something like physical removal of certain species by humans is generally not very cost effective, and it's a hard thing to implement in a lot of landscapes. And so grazing animals can be used to, as I mentioned, mimic some of these disturbances that would have been natural, but we no longer see. And targeted grazing can be used for a tool, commonly it's for wildfire mitigation, invasive species control, and wildlife habitat enhancement. And this either, the wildfire mitigation is done through reducing fuel loads, whether that's fine fuel loads or reducing the abundance of woody species, and then invasive species control. is similar. It's just basically manipulating the ecosystem to try to push it in one direction or another. And same with wildlife habitat enhancement. Go ahead. So why targeted grazing? Targeted grazing from a scientific standpoint and research has been shown to increase ecosystem health through increases in biodiversity, wildlife habitat, as I mentioned before, reducing populations of undesirable plant species, whether that be an invasive or we deal with a lot of woody encroachment. As you can see in that picture with the goats, they're getting after some Gamble oak, which is a major, it's a major wildfire risk for us. It allows for our fires to grow into the canopy and get pretty out of control. And then it also has a tendency to encroach on spaces where it really shouldn't be. And so that's a major reason for targeted grazing. And then, of course, as she mentioned, there can be some increases in soil health. And it's, as far as increases in soil health and ecosystem health in general, well-managed grazing, regardless of whether it's targeted or not, can have those effects. It is considered safe and environmentally friendly, as I mentioned, with the controlled burning. There's many places, especially in the wildland urban interface, where controlled burns are not an option. The risk is just too high. And then, as well as with herbicide applications, the residual herbicide effects in the soil and on the plants, and then eventually to human health, is not very desirable. And goats do not have, they're not dangerous, except for they might, possibly jump on your car or something if they get it out. But they're not a dangerous thing. And they also are putting in nutrients, which are a positive thing, opposed to residual effects of something like herbicide. And so they can be fair, or the targeted grazing can be cost effective and applied at a small or large scale, as well as used in places that are inaccessible for other treatment types. As far as the cost effectiveness, we touched on that a little bit, and that's very specific to what sort of a project that you're dealing with and how cost effective that can actually be. Generally, it is more cost effective, and especially the wildland urban interfaces, which is a lot of where the interest is for goats, than sending in a hand crew, which is usually the other alternative. And it oftentimes same with herbicides. Next slide. The effects on soil health, this is a soil group. So that was a big part of this presentation. As I mentioned, any sort of properly managed grazing can increase soil health properties. This is usually done through hoof impact and herd impact. It's historically, these herds of ruminants would have moved around as a large group and not spread out the way that many of them do in our traditional grazing operations, in many small groups, and overgraze a lot of those areas. So they would come in a big group, clear off until the forage that they're desiring was gone, and then they would move on. And with this, you get quite a bit of positive hoof impact by breaking up the soil, breaking up capping and crusting, which allows for seedlings to establish. They can drill seed, which is an awesome thing that they can do, especially if you're trying to restore a site. They can come in and take care of some of the species you don't want there, and then you can spread seed in front of them, and they can drill seed for the desirable species. And then obviously they also deposit nutrients through their urine and feces. The effects have been shown. This is, I don't have any hard research from my company yet. Most of it's anecdotal, but there's been a lot of research done on management intensive grazing, and they have been able to show that it can improve water and mineral cycling, surface water retention, which that I've definitely seen with my own eyes. I don't have any data that's been collected long enough to back it up, but the amount of litter that these big herds can lay down on the ground is quite amazing. If the litter's there in front of them to be laid down. And with that comes increase in soil organic matter, which helps accumulate carbon, helps with the soil nutrient cycling and retention, helps cool the ground, the soil biosphere cooling, and also helps to form soil with the increases in organic matter and stabilize the soil with that litter cover. So it can really do a lot of really neat things when managed properly. This was a big thing for me to mention. It's good for everyone to know that when you're dealing with nature, the nature of nature is that things are unpredictable and they don't always go exactly as planned. So while there can be many benefits to soil through well-managed grazing and targeted grazing efforts, there's also effects to the soil that do happen. But it's almost some things you can't control that are negative to the soil. So you have to, when you're doing these projects, especially after a burn, or if there's not a lot of dry matter standing with the plants for them to lay on the ground, the herd impact can have negative effects by soil disturbance and possibly causing more erosion, trailing, and basically just overall too much impact on the area. So that's something to keep in mind. And it's you can manage the best that you can for it, but inevitably sometimes that's going to happen. All right, so what livestock species? This is important to think about when you're planning a targeted grazing project. You need to be thinking about what the overall objectives of the project are, what you want your ecosystem to look like when all of this is said and done, and what sort of species that you're dealing with. And so as far as plant species. Any species of ruminant can be used for these, and some are going to be more effective on projects than others. So cattle, sheep, and goats can all be effective for targeted grazing. The goats are oftentimes thought of as possibly the best species, and that's partially because of their preference for diet and also their physiological adaptations to handle secondary metabolites, or basically poisons that the plants carry that other ruminants can't handle. And so they work really well for this. But once again, you want to think about the species. So for example, with fine fuel loads, your grasses and whatnot, especially I like to use cheatgrass as an example. I believe that cheatgrass is a job for cattle or sheep. The goats just don't have a huge preference for grasses. They'll eat them. But it's not their preferred diet. And so in a case where you're dealing with a lot of grasses and fine fuels, sheep or cattle would be the species you'd want to look at. Now, if you're dealing with woody species, goats are always going to be the answer. That's their favorite thing to do, is browse woody species. They also take care of forbs really well and are more willing to eat a lot of things that other animals aren't. But deciding what species of livestock is going to work best for the project is something that needs to be considered when you're planning out objectives and what exactly you're trying to do. Timing and duration of treatments is really important. Once again, depending on what the objectives are, if you're just trying to reduce fuel loads, or if you're actually trying to push the plant community in a different direction, timing and the duration is really critical. Especially in the case where you're just trying to move the ecosystem in a different direction as far as the community composition. So the reason for that is that there's two things you have to consider. You have to consider when the plant is at its weakest point in the year, and when it's going to take, I guess, the hardest hit from the treatment. And then also you have to consider when the secondary metabolites are the highest in the plant, which affects the palatability for the animals. So if they're really high and the nutrients aren't high enough for the animal to want to eat them, then you're going to have to really push the animals very hard to actually ingest the plant. And so it's critical to make sure that you know your species well enough to know when the best time of year is to go ahead and treat those. High stocking rates are generally required to be effective. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Soil health is a big one. And then also to reduce the selectivity of the grazing of the animals. especially if you're asking them to eat something that isn't maybe a preferred species. And so you have to run them together in tight groups to have the effects that you're looking for, with the herd impact and the hoof effect, and then also to reduce the selectivity of the grazing. Oftentimes these treatments are best combined with other forms of treatment. So for example, we treat, as I mentioned, a lot of Gamble oak, and the goats are the most effective when there's been a different type of treatment ahead of them. So either mastication with machines, hand crews, or controlled burns, so that they can come in and hold the plant back. It's more of a maintenance thing than it is to try to, especially with something like oak brush, knock back a mature stand. That's just really hard to do. So having that in mind, that you should possibly combine it with other treatments. It's an integrated system more than just a one size fits all. Also, something that needs to be considered with this is it's the human condition to want immediate results. People want to see things happen right away, and that's not the way it works generally in nature, and definitely not in our arid ecosystems here in the desert Southwest. And so these treatments should be looked at as a multiple year treatment, regardless of whether you're just trying to reduce fuels or if you're trying to change the composition of the plant communities. I just wanted to give a little bit of an example of some species specific stuff. This is our Gamble oak. We have a lot of it here. There's been very little research done on the effectiveness of goats, but the two research projects that have happened have shown that goats can be quite effective to reducing the stands of oak brush, which is a great tool for this particular species because this species is not well understood. It's very prolific, and it's a definite management concern for most land managers. This is a great example of a species that a lot of animals are not really willing to consume, or if they do consume it, it's very little. You know, cattle and horses and sheep will eat it, but it's in minimal amounts. But for goats, this is a highly palatable species. It meets all of their nutrient requirements, and they absolutely love it. And so this is a great example of where targeted grazing can be really effective, partially because it is highly desirable to the goats. And so you're not having to really force the animals on it. They would like to just go in there and eat it regardless. And so they do a great job producing this particular species and then leaving everything else behind. Also, as I mentioned, how this works with a species like Gamble oak is you go in year after year when the carbohydrates, when it's trying to use its carbohydrate reserves to either get up and going in the spring or give its last push in the fall. And by reducing or defoliating the plant, it then has to draw more reserves out of its roots to put those leaves back on to make it through the season. And over time, that reduces the vigor of the plant and the root system, the extent of the root system, as the roots basically shrink and the carbohydrates are pulled out of them year after year when it's a really critical time. Oh, there we go. Here's some before and after pictures of a targeted grazing project we did in Utah with Gamble oak. So on the right there, or on the left, you can see what that looked like before. That had been masticated with machines about 4 or 5 years prior to the goats getting there. And then on the right, you can see what it looked like after the goats had come through. Now, as I mentioned, you do have to come back year after year, and it takes quite a while. And so another thing you'll see on these projects is oftentimes these plants will, they're basically at war with you. And so they will push out leaves and get back after it right away. And so sometimes these treatments need to be done twice a year, and they certainly need to be repeated every year. Go ahead. Some things you need to know about planning a targeted grazing project. And as it says there, this is just the short list. There's a lot of planning that goes into these projects on the front end to make them successful for the client as well as the operator. The project objectives and outcomes they need to be clearly defined, and it's always a plan A. Things are unpredictable and it may not go as exactly as planned, but you need to have some sort of a roadmap and an idea of where you're trying to get. And this needs to be very explicitly lined out between the client and the operator so that everybody is very clear on what the expectations are. Animal welfare is top priority for those of us that are operating these herds. We are caring for living, breathing animals, and they come number one, at least in my book. It's very important that they stay safe and healthy. And it takes a lot of effort on our part. And so sometimes, especially with these targeted grazing, there's additional supplementation that needs to be given to the animals to keep them in good condition. Oftentimes that can also help them eat more of the desirable plants. That's a whole nother rabbit hole that I won't get into. But it's just really important that you're aware of that if you hire a contractor to come in and do a targeted grazing project, that the animals are really important. And oftentimes in a situation like mine, it's a lot of animals. So it's a big herd of goats. We generally have 2 horses on project, 6 guard dogs, and 2 herding dogs. And so with that, we have to make sure that everybody stays safe and happy and healthy. It's a team effort. There's a lot of people, as I mentioned, including the animals, that are part of the project and are part of our team. And it's also essential that the client performs their due diligence to educate everybody that's involved, whether that's other folks in the agency that are involved or landowners, bystanders that want to come see the animals and see the project. Everybody needs to be very clear and make sure that you educate whoever's on your side about the do's and don'ts surrounding the operator's ability to operate, basically. So I guess an example, just to give folks, when we are out there with goats and livestock guardian dogs, it's oftentimes people will want to come see the goats and they will want to bring their pet dogs with them. And that's a don't. And so it's just really important that everybody understands that it's not a good time to be bringing your domestic dog into a situation like that, partially for their safety and also for the safety of our goats and our dogs. As I mentioned before, this is a multi-year treatment and often requires treatment, more than one treatment in a growing season. So that needs to be thought about when you're getting into this. It's not a one and done sort of a situation. And so as far as budgeting goes, and NEPA, as he mentioned, things like that, it needs to be thought of as something that's going to take a while. And the theory is that if you're a good targeted grazer, you will be eating yourself out of jobs. And that is the goal, is to, change these things for the better. And so it's not a forever, but at least for the first 3 to 5 years, you should plan on the animals being there doing these treatments. Other plant communities and soils will be affected, usually in a good way, but not always. In the case of woody encroachment or handling a species like Gambel oak, especially when it's already really out of control, the best way to treat it is to go in and defoliate the plants up to 80 to 90%. And doing that, the goats we'll just use goats as an example. While that's 80% of their diet is browse, the other 40% comes in forbs and grasses. And so they're not only going to eat oak brush, they're going to also ingest understory plant communities. And so especially at the beginning of a treatment, sometimes those communities can get overgrazed. And so it's important to think about the effects on your understory communities and your soil health and how you want to balance that as the treatment progresses. Pricing is very project specific. It's even hard for me to give you much of a range. I could say, I guess our projects generally range somewhere between $90 an acre all the way up to $1,500 an acre, depending on the job. I know some targeted grazers in California that have charged as much as $5,000 an acre. So it really is very specific to the project. For us, because we run a large herd, the larger the project, the more cost effective we can make it for the client. So that's another thing to think about, especially for residential projects. You know, if you can put together several neighbors that would also like the goats to come, that can generally make it more cost effective for you and more enticing for a grazier to come in and perform the projects. The site visit, it's really important to do a site visit before any sort of estimating comes in. Partially, the logistics of a business like this can be very complicated as far as what sort of terrain you're dealing with, how much fencing is going to be needed, whether you can free range herd the goats, how often you're going to be needing to move electric fence, things like that. And so without looking at a project, it's very hard for us as operators to give you a very good estimate on what it's actually going to take to perform that project. And also, with that being said, as everything, the cost of everything increases, the cost of these treatments will also increase. And one of the big costs for my clients is transport of the animals to the project site. And so that's something that'll need to also be thought about. Where is your operator coming from, and how much is that going to cost on your end? I think you can go to the next one. Okay, so I guess that's we're more or less wrapping up. That's probably pretty timely. I think this is recorded, and so folks should be able to access this. There's a lot of resources out there about this. There's a lot of people doing research. There's some great committees that have formed to educate people about this and understand more how this can be used as an effective tool. So here's a few. That first one is it's the Targeted Grazing Handbook. It's really awesome. It gives you all kinds of specifics about what you should expect from an there's lots of species specific information on how species should be treated, what our plant species should be treated, what livestock species to be used. It's just a really great resource. Same with that comes from University of Idaho. And then the SRM Targeted Grazing section, which is the Society of Range Management. And then a couple of scientific journal articles that talk a little bit about some of the things I talked about for your reference. Google's a great thing. There's lots of information out there. Go ahead to the next one. Here's my information. It's a little hard to see there. If you're interested in hiring our company, we do try to service most of the Southwest region. We try to focus in the Four Corners area and then the Southwest in general. And so there's all my contact stuff. And then last is some more local for the folks in New Mexico. Galloping Goat Pumpkin Patch, run by Max Wade. He's out of Rio Rancho, New Mexico. He prefers to be contacted through a phone call or text, and can also be, you can learn a little bit more about his company on the social media platforms. And then horned locust remediation goatscaping. That's Amanita Thorberto. She's out of Santa Fe, and she prefers text and can also be seen on Facebook and Instagram, her company. And then Goats on the Go is not an operator that I personally know. They are an affiliate company that has contract graziers or affiliates throughout the United States. And I'm not sure if they have anybody down here in our region, but they very well might. And they've been doing this for quite a while, and is another good resource. They also do quite a bit of education and outreach about targeted grazing. And so oftentimes they'll have informational webinars and things of that nature to help educate the public. So I think that's the last slide. Is that right, Isabel? Yep. Okay. So yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us and all the interest for this this awesome tool. It's pretty novel in our area still. Amanita has been doing it for quite a while, but other than that, there's not a lot of us here. It's been being practiced for much longer in California. It's a pretty normal thing out there, but it's awesome to see it starting to branch out into some other parts of the country. It's a pretty neat tool.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was super informative. I see there are already some questions in the chat, but I want to give a chance to Amanita, who's here with us, to just share a few things that she would like us to know about her work as well. Go ahead, unmute yourself, Amanita.
I had to find my mute. Boy, I don't know what to say. Sarah, you covered a whole bunch there, and you've got such a great academic perspective there. And I've been seeing you doing so much work. So it's so awesome to see everybody working. I'm just, I'm here and I'm working as much as I can, big and small, and I'm really excited to see everybody, the land managers, really stepping into it and taking advantage of this tool that we do have here. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Amanita, and thank you for your good work. It's been great. I've seen you in action at the Santa Fe Rail Yard, and follow you on Instagram. You go many places, so thank you for all of that. And anyone who wants the contact information, we can also share it in the chat. So let's see what kind of messages we have here in the chat. Actually, while I do that, before I forget, I wanted to give a quick chance to Rosa, who has a survey to share. It's somewhat related. It's related to soil health. So, hey, it's related. Go ahead, Rosa, before I forget, while I'm getting my bearings here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the space. I really like this webinar. It was very informative. I didn't know anything about grazing, target grazing. So thank you very much. I'm Rosa Soriano. I'm from Dominican Republic, and I'm a master's student at New Mexico Highland University. With my advisor, we are working in a socio-economic research about biochar. We want to understand what could be the barriers that landowners have to implement or incorporate biochar into their land management, as well the opportunities that are in that area. And we are collecting data through a survey. I could share the link in the chat after. And if the people is interested later, we are conducting some follow-up interviews for the research. So excellent. Thank you very much for the space.
Thank you, Rosa, and good luck with the research. Yeah, please do share the URL in the chat. We will check it out. So with that, there's some questions have been answered in the chat, but here's a question from Atlas for Sarah. Have you had issues with getting goats to eat new plants they didn't eat previously?
Yeah, absolutely. So a novel plant species, like with the oak brush, that's something that is so palatable to them that it wasn't a problem. Or the rush of an olive in your background there as well. That's something they like right off the bat. But yeah, it's important for them to be adapted to the ecosystems and the plants that are around them. And so oftentimes you can, sometimes it starts with a little bit of, you have to teach them to eat it. They have to almost have no choice. And if it's something that's nutritious and is giving them what they need, they learn it. And then they consume more and more of it over time. But yeah, absolutely, that can be an issue.
Great. And a follow-up question from Atlas, would you ever suggest to a client to do landscape modification, terracing, berms and swales, etc., so that maybe connects to your mention that it's an integrated practice, right, with other practices?
Absolutely. And so that's another thing that, I tell all of my clients is once we come in and do the treatment, it's then up to the client to continue the restoration efforts. And so they're not the total fix for all of the things that are generally going on in an ecosystem. Generally, there is a lack of disturbance is a major thing that's caused, or too much disturbance. So oftentimes it's, overall management problems of the land or situations that is causing the problem that you're trying to correct. And so they absolutely need to be an integrated solution where you are thinking about, overall, in the case of the bosques, your geomorphology and your hydromorphology and all of the other stuff that goes into a healthy riparian system, not just reducing the fuel loads and the overgrowth of brush and invasive species.
Yeah, and so actually I have a follow-up question to that. So do you do this kind of planning as well, or how does that take place?
I can help with it. I do have another enterprise as part of my business where I do rangeland monitoring and consulting for rangeland health. So that's it, but that's a completely separate business, but it can be integrated into the project as hiring is from a consulting standpoint. And I can't answer that for the other operators. I'm not sure if they help with other types of planning and whatnot. But for me, it's certainly something that I can put on the schedule as a separate service. Great.
Yes, a question from Rosa. Which factors increase the prices of treatments?
The amount of time that the project will take. This is speaking for me. So the amount of time that my goats can stay on a project, because it costs a lot of money and there's a lot of logistical coordination to move these animals around. And so that's a big one for us. It can really bring the cost of a project down if it's somewhere where the project is going to take us a month or more to complete. And then also the overall logistics of the project. So for us, we do mostly range herding, and we prefer, because production of animals is part of our business plan, our goats need to stay really healthy as mothers. And so we try to stick with projects that have the type of species that are highly nutritious and palatable for the goats. And so that can also make a difference. And then the logistics of a project, if we're having to set up and take down lots of electric fence and move over really difficult terrain, move our camps around often, all of that is going to increase the price of the treatment.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Next question is from Stephanie. Do you ever encounter any issues contracting with government entities? And I know she's from the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. And if so, what can entities do to make the process easier to contract with?
The biggest thing is NEPA. NEPA is a major hurdle to get over, especially on federal land. That's what we deal with quite a bit. And because this is a tool and a treatment and a different livestock species that our more recent NEPA have covered when they do an environmental assessment, that's the biggest hurdle. And so what you can do is that the more of these projects that happen and the more agencies that are willing to go through the NEPA process and try it, the easier this is all going to be, because then it won't be so daunting for the government officials or whoever's dealing with this. It won't be such a daunting thing to try to go ahead and implement this with having to do a whole new environmental assessment for a particular project. So that's probably the best way to try to get around that. But yeah, it absolutely can become, it's more than anything, it just takes a long time. So you want to plan well ahead. If this is something and you are going to have to do an EA for one of these projects, you want to start thinking about that way in advance.
And NEPA stands for?
I'm so used to using national, oh man.
Someone help her out.
Yeah, help her out.
National Environmental Protection Act passed in 1972 by Richard Nixon.
Awesome.
There you go.
And EA is environmental assessment, I believe?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, thanks, just to get through the acronym soup here.
and ESA is also prominent, Endangered Species Act. So in the Bosque, that's a front and center consideration for us down here. How to weave through the NEPA and ESA quarters. I don't want to run away from that, right? I want federal dollars. on the landscape, but boy, there is local lack of expertise to administer those federal acts. But if California can do it, why can't New Mexico?
Definitely, yeah.
Right. Archaeology is also a major hurdle for us here in the Southwest. We're trying to put the goats on a sagebrush project on the BLM outside of Farmington, New Mexico, starting this winter. And that was one of the big hurdles for us, is trying to figure out how to avoid these archaeological sites. And so that's another big one.
Indeed. And Andrew, you had another question here. Let me just read it. If fuel break maintenance is the goal, can electric fencing be effective or affordable to keep goats from areas they aren't wanted?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, electric fencing.
Yeah, it can't, it's going to increase the price of a project, but absolutely, it's a very, very effective tool to put the goats where you want them to be. It works really good.
Yeah, I'm just concerned about the thinness of a fuel break, and is there enough there to have the goats there for enough time so you're not, a week later you're moving the fence, and then again and again and again. It just seems like it could be very.
Yeah, well, what you were talking about. Yeah, so you're talking about those like 50-foot swaths that you were talking about at your presentation, right? So, I mean, you would just make long, narrow, basically paddocks for them, and that's part of why I say it increases the cost, because depending on how many goats you have in there, which you want high stock density and you want to move them fast, and so you're moving electric fence really quickly, and so that's part of what for us as operators increases the logistical challenges of a project. So in a situation like that, I mean, there's a good possibility you'd be moving fence more than once a day.
Interesting. Thanks, Sarah. And here's our last question. How do you handle watering the animals? Would you keep wool sheep in your herd, or is it too dirty for their coats? Oh, that's like 2 questions, I suppose. So first of all, how do you handle watering the animals?
It depends on the project. That's also defined when you set up a project. So it's a requirement for me that the client provides a water source, whether that's a natural water source or municipal water that we can access. And then it's defined on whether or not, if it's somewhere where we have to haul water to the goats, then we define who's responsible for hauling the water. So in the case of a project we do over in Durango, we haul the water to the goats, they provide the water. And that also is reflected in the cost of the project. In a project we have coming up on the Forest Service, it's because it's been so dry here, we're in such an extreme drought, all of the natural water sources in the dirt tanks is dried up. And so they're going to help haul the water, especially because it's going to be a lot of water. So that's how we deal with the water situation. If there's a natural source, that's always often the most convenient for a lot of our projects, because we do open range herding. Goats can travel pretty far to get water, and they're very efficient with water. And so watering once a day, even in the summer, is enough for the goats. And so what we do on those projects is we go to an area, we do our treatments, and then midday we go water the goats and then put them away for a nap for a couple hours and then take them back out. And so we can take them to water sources also.
Right.
And then what was
the second question was, and this sounds like somebody is considering becoming a shepherd, really, which I think is a great idea. Would you keep wool sheep in your herd, or is it too dirty for their coats?
Well, we keep wool sheep. Am I on? Can't even tell.
Yeah, Amanita's probably a better person to answer that question.
Go
I
ahead.
got all glitchy and lost everybody. Am I still here?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
Oh, there I am. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we keep true, Navajo true. The same thing as Sarah was talking about in keeping the health is foremost for the herd. If it's too dirty for wool sheep, it's too dirty for everybody else. So, you know, we try to avoid mucky situations, but in general, they are a great addition to the herd.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you have a really mixed herd, right? And isn't that a flirt? I think that's the term.
Mhm.
With that, I don't see any more questions, and we are at time. I do want to share our new online tool, but first of all, many thanks to Sarah. And just quickly, Andrew, do you have anything else you would like to ask Sarah or share with everybody before we wrap it up here?
No, just thanks to both you, Isabel, and Sarah, and let's stay connected. I think I really like what Sarah was pushing. Was it seems like we're in catch-up mode here in New Mexico, so let's keep the momentum going, and like you say, land managers like myself, as we start getting intrigued and trying to use this as a tool, well, a story's going to get told here that hopefully we get, more stories getting told. So
that's great. And so thank you, Sarah. Anything else you would like to share? Last words?
I don't think so. I think it's encouraging that everybody's really interested. Just one thing, for me, at least with my company, is we do have a minimum of a 1 month treatment, or a minimum of 100 acres, depending on what the species is. And so the smaller stuff, the residential stuff, would be better to probably contact Amanito or Max for that stuff.
That's great. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your work, and it was a great presentation, and we have it recorded, so it will live on and bring a lot of benefit, I know. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, with that, I'm just gonna quickly, before we wrap up here, share something that my group has been working on. It's the New Mexico Grazing Exchange, and this is really a sneak peek. It's up online, you can get to it, but we haven't promoted it very widely yet because there's a few little tweaks that we're still making. It's under the URL nmgrazingexchange.com. And this is what you see when you get to it first. And it's basically a map where you can enter your grazing services, or where you can ask for livestock to come onto the land that you take care of. So you can see there's a map right now with a couple of entries. And if you zoom in, for example, we can go here. This is actually Horned Locust, Amanita's company. She has put her information there. And so if you are interested in accessing her services, you can contact her through this website. You can get yourself on the map by making a pin, getting a little account going, and this is basically described here. I'm not sure why it's not loading right now, but it's all pretty intuitive. You just get a login and sign. Here we go. It was just having a hiccup. Sign yourself up, create an account. If you're offering grazing services, you can share what kind of animals you have. Or if you have land, you share what kind of land it is, if it's native rangeland, or if you are having a cover crop that would like to be grazed, those kinds of things, your address, and then the pin will appear on the map in the front. There's a couple resources on this website, but this is basically the idea that we facilitate people with animals, finding people without animals, but with forage to share. And so that is the idea of this grazing exchange. There's a couple actually around in the nation, and they're gaining momentum. So it's pretty cool that we will have one here in New Mexico, and I would encourage you all to make good use of it. I will put the URL in the chat, and I hope that you take good advantage of it. So that's all we have today. Really appreciate everybody being here. There's a lot of thank yous in the chat. Again, thanks to our presenters and for all of you to be interested in this topic and for caring for our land and for